Thank you all for being with us this evening. Thank you to JNF as always. Day 19. Just give you one Israeli's day. I began the day by visiting two families whose sons have been kidnapped. One of whose whereabouts is known. They know he's in captivity. One of them they do not know. There are still at least 150, perhaps even more, missing people who have not been identified. They actually don't know where they are. And I tell you the truth, I don't know which is worse, knowing your kids in captivity or not knowing where they are at all. And these families are going through just unspeakable emotional distress and pain. I also went to just came back from a shiva from a wonderful, extraordinary young man from Rockville, Maryland, on Bavla, who was a lone soldier in Israel. And on October 7th, that nefarious November 7th, left his home, Rockville, Maryland, came to Israel, joined his reserve unit, and was killed earlier this week by a Hezbollah anti-tank rocket in the north. I was just with his family about an hour ago. Extraordinary story. These are the stories of Israel, and the stories keep going on. Emotionally, I must tell you, we're still very much in October 7th. We haven't moved beyond it. The stories just keep on coming out. And this country is, on one hand, in deep trauma, deep mourning, and shock, frankly, shock. And throughout it all, the missiles keep on falling, and the casualty rates keep on climbing. They're still fighting along our borders, both in the south and in the north. And I, as an historian, I can look back and see many comparisons between the Six-Day War. We're now entering the third week of our waiting period. There was a 3-week waiting period before the Six-Day War. Of course, the surprise attacks of 1973, but it really resembles Israel's War of Independence, where we are fighting in our hinterland, in our neighborhoods, in our communities. And most of the casualties have been civilian casualties, not military casualties. And we are fighting, and make no mistake about it, we are fighting for our survival. We're fighting for our existence, not just for our security. There are many challenges facing us, and it's important that you understand what those challenges are, because many of them are not just physical military challenges. Of course, they are strategic, and they are diplomatic, and even legal. And what are they? As this conflict now enters its third week, well into its third week, those of us who are interviewing with the international press, and I spend my nights interviewing with the international press, maybe you've seen me on the major channels, have noticed a change, of course, in the narrative. It switched from the suffering of the Jewish victims of Hamas, the torture, the beheading, the burning, the rape, the incarcerations, the kidnappings, to Palestinian suffering of the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who have moved in our direction, by the way, are urging very much out of the way of fire, out of those combat zones of northern Gaza Strip, because that is where the major fighting is going. And that challenges us with a tremendous challenge for all of us. First of all, to remember the suffering. We're still in it, but many people outside of Israel are already forgetting it, and to recall it all the time. To distinguish the fact that we are actually, by moving these Palestinians out of the combat zone, we are actually reducing at a great level the danger of inflicting civilian casualties in immense numbers. And that's certainly what was happened if we actually fight in Gaza City with the Palestinian population there. As it is the worst possible combat environment you can imagine, because it's dark alleys and cul-de-sacs and rubble, all mined and booby-trapped and enfiladed with crossfires. But the main combat area is not above ground, it's below ground, where Hamas has dug dozens of miles, maybe even hundreds of miles, we don't know entirely, of tunnels and bunkers, all of which are armed and manned and ready to fight. And the obvious solution would be maybe to flood them or set them afire, but we can't do that because of the hostages that are kept down there. Two of the elderly hostages that were released 2 days ago talked about being brought into this labyrinth of tunnels and how extraordinary it was for them to see it. So you got a small glimpse of it. So we can't use an obvious tactic. We're going to have to go into those tunnels, each and every one of them, and flush out Hamas guerrillas inside. Very, very dangerous work. The big diplomatic danger is the increased pressure on Israel to agree to a ceasefire. And I've noticed, subtle changes in the administration, which insisted there would be a ceasefire, still does, but now talking about pauses. And there's, I don't know, much of a distinction between a pause and a ceasefire. But I need every one of you to understand what I'm about to tell you, and that is a ceasefire for Israel is death. A ceasefire means Hamas wins. A ceasefire means that Hamas gets away with massacring 1,400 of our citizens. By the way, those of you who can do the math, that's the equivalent of between 52 and 54,000 Americans in a 48-hour period. It's inconceivable. A ceasefire means Hamas wins. A ceasefire means we cannot restore the security to our borders. A ceasefire means that we cannot restore our deterrence power, which has been grievously reduced, leaving us in a perilous position in the region. And a ceasefire means that we cannot begin to restore and repair the relationship between the people of Israel and the state of Israel, because that has also been severely damaged. Tremendous amount of a very amount of discontent, and that's an understatement, of the people of Israel for the state of Israel in all of its organs, the government, the army, the security apparatus, intelligence. There are many failures, and there'll be a time for investigating those failures and finding those responsible. This is not the time. But we do have to think about creating the circumstances in which we can begin to rebuild. And we will not be able to rebuild under the shadow of warheads of Hamas. We simply will not be able to do that. Ceasefire for us means this place basically becomes uninhabitable. And I don't know who would come here as a tourist. I don't know who would invest here. I don't know. People would raise their kids here. It's that type of issue, a ceasefire. And I'm not exaggerating here. And we have to resist it because there are plenty of people signing petitions in Hollywood and unions, all calling for a ceasefire. Sure, that's the obvious thing. Let's stop the violence. Violence is a bad thing. Right? We all know violence is a bad thing. But we also know that Israel has to respond. That's like, I'm always trying to think of a good example would be like saying on December 8th, 1941, saying, hey, the Japanese built Pearl Harbor, but they got a lot of American prisoners, so let's have a ceasefire. That's like saying on September 12th, 2001, okay, Al-Qaeda killed 3,000 people, but, we don't want violence. Let's have a ceasefire. It doesn't work. It doesn't work for America. It's certainly not going to work for the state of Israel because our existence is at stake. It's very much at stake. It won't be easy. The chances of a second front opening up in the north are acute. They're real. We owe a tremendous debt to President Biden, who has come out in ways, and I know him quite well. He has come out for us in ways that I would not have anticipated, even knowing him very well. Not just the personal compassion, but his willingness to send major naval assets, and these are huge flotillas, into harm's way, into a combat zone, against, the only bipartisan issue in Washington, which is isolationism, and the opposition to further American entanglements and foreign engagements. But having said that, I've got to be very frank with you. We're all among friends here. There's no such thing as a free lunch. And the fact that the president has done this has enabled him to make demands of Israel, like opening up a humanitarian corridor into Gaza. I've just come from these families of the kidnapped, and they can't understand why we agreed to that, why we agreed to this humanitarian corridor. It's the only leverage we had over Hamas. And of course, most of this humanitarian aid is not going to go to the refugees. It's going to go to Hamas in some way. Fuel went in today. I can't understand why we let fuel go into Hamas. These are very difficult political decisions. But this was a condition. This was a request of the president of the United States, and it's very difficult to say no to that. Reportedly, the administration has also been against those who have advocated for attacking Hezbollah first. And I'm saying this because I was one of the people who advocated for attacking Hezbollah first. I wrote about it. If you want to see it on my Substack, it's called Clarity. There's a whole argument there, a strategic and tactical argument, why it made sense to attack Hezbollah first. Apparently, the Biden administration does not want that. I can understand that they have their ships there. And if we were to attack first, that would certainly, in some point, is very likely to involve those naval forces in active combat. All that is happening today on the 19th day of the war. And we're all waiting to see when Israel will give the word to our troops to advance into Gaza. There have been many reasons advanced why this isn't happening. There are logistical reasons. We are softening up the positions of Hamas from the air, from the ground, in the sea, so that we will incur fewer casualties as we move into these densely populated and heavily mined areas. There are questions of equipment, of training, but the fact of the matter is we're up against several clocks. One of the clock is the 360,000 reservists who've been called up. You understand how big this force is: 360,000 plus about maybe over 100,000 standing troops in the regular army. That is more reservists than the entire U.S. military, especially the size of the army that went into Iraq in 2003. And these are the most productive parts of our society. These are the young women and men in their 20s and their 30s. So there's a limit to how much long we can keep this massive force mobilized and inactive. And keeping them this way you're engaging a certain level of demoralization if they do nothing. That too is very important. We're up against, as I mentioned, the international community. It's the switching of the narrative from Jewish suffering to Palestinian suffering, which will translate very, very fast into diplomatic pressure on us. We're up against the question of the hostages and playing Hamas's game, where Hamas is going to release 1 or 2 hostages every day, preferably those with foreign nationalities. And that will essentially make us Hamas's hostages. Whole state of Israel and the world will be made hostages to Hamas. So we cannot wait indefinitely. It could be happening in the next hour. It could be happening tonight, tomorrow. But brace yourself. It is not going to be easy. Irrespective of what happens, it is not going to be easy. It's going to be a brutal war. And Israel and its friends, its supporters in the world, certainly with the Jewish National Fund, are going to play a crucial role in standing up for us politically. Make your voices heard on the state, local, federal level. Give, of course, to urgent causes in this country, JNF principle among them. Stand up to anti-Semitism, whether it be on the campuses or in the workplace. And anti-Semitism is soaring right now. And stand up to the anti-Semitism of silence, because to me that's a particularly venal part of anti-Semitism we're experiencing right now, of all the college presidents and those Hollywood celebrities who are saying nothing. Stand up for that as well. All of it. I'm not in any official capacity. I will be visiting many JNF chapters starting in November, God willing. I'll be coming to Denver to meet you all at the major convention there. But I can say, for the people, state of Israel, thank you. Thank you for everything you're doing for us. Everything you're doing for the Jewish people worldwide, in America as well. Stick with us. If there's one tragic silver lining to this whole incident, and that is that Hamas, in its barbarism, has reminded us that we are a nation. We are a state. We are a people. Hamas has reminded us that we're a family. And as a family, we will stake together and we'll win. Am Yisrael Chai, everyone. Am Yisrael Chai.